shift from digital, well, it actually ties in nicely with mobile, let's talking about audio a little bit.
Yeah.
So obviously there's radio, and I want to spend some time on radio. Not sexy, but it is what it is. In fact, radio is still really high compared to video and some other things. You wouldn't know it here, but it is. So, but podcasting, before we get to radio, podcasting, that's been one that I know when we spoke before, it's had some interesting upticks and trends, upward swings in the past year or so. So can you speak a little to that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously with Serial, which was, I think, a couple years ago, that was the kind of a news peg for people kind of realizing that there was this explosion of interest in podcasts. But it's been kind of a slow, steady climb. So I can show you what the numbers look like. So this is the percent of Americans who have listened to a podcast. The top line's ever, and then the bottom line is in the past month. So you can see, it's currently 40% have ever listened to a podcast. Compared with some of the numbers we saw even for social media, that is lower. But if you think of podcasting as this kind of thing only a few people do, we are seeing larger numbers than that. So 24% said they've listened to a podcast in the past month. This isn't specifically for news. These are kind of broad overall numbers. But there's definitely been kind of an uptick in interest. I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe the production is getting better. People are getting better at kind of figuring out what the audience wants. But yeah, again, it's a little bit like the YouTube thing. New creators are coming to this new medium where production values are low and distribution is very easy, and trying new things. So you have like the Young Turks on YouTube, and you have Chapo Trap House and some of the other political podcasts on the podcast medium. And it's just people trying different things, and it's all kind of weird, and sometimes it's very awkward. Sometimes you download a podcast and it's just like two people talking for an hour, and you're like, man, I don't know if I needed to listen to this. But sometimes it's these.
We're not doing a podcast.
Yeah, that's true. I guess this is a better podcast than some of the podcasts.
It would be. I agree.
I'm biased. I'm
agree.
obviously biased, but but yeah. So there's a lot of variation in the content and the sponsorship. But I mean, you hear jokes on Twitter and stuff about hearing the same podcast ads over and over for kind of Stamps.com and I think it's GoDaddy or one of the registrars or stuff. So there tend to be kind of a few companies that have kind of flooded the podcast space in terms of sponsorship. But I think that there's some talk too about whether or not podcasts are profitable. So people are kind of interested in whether or not they can make a lot of money. You can just do it in your basement. So people are still trying to figure that out. Here's just another set of numbers. This is NPR specific podcasts. And you can see kind of the same slow, steady growth from 2 million in 2014 to 3.5 million last year. That's the number of weekly unique users who download NPR podcasts. So again, 3.5 million is like, 1% of the population or something. But slow but steady growth, and obviously weekly engagement with the same podcast can reveal a certain kind of audience member that you might be interested in reaching. What my other podcast thing is here. Okay, that was it. So yeah, podcasts again are just this kind of ocean. You dive into the YouTube or the iTunes list, and you get all these different podcasts on true crime and fitness and everything, news, everything you can think of. And so people are still trying to figure it out and trying a lot of different things. But the audience seems to be picking it up. Yeah.
I think that's what's interesting with podcasts from a marketer, communicator perspective is you can get so narrowly focused on the subject matter. There's podcasts specific to financial, podcasts specific to agriculture. You can get really specific. So if there is, once the chaos settles out and those that are doing it really well rise to the top, there's an opportunity to really provide solid content to a narrowly focused target audience. It's just, I think right now everybody's trying everything, and it is a bit overwhelming what's out there. But it does have an interesting, I know we spent time talking about it with some of our clients, it has an interesting opportunity there. If once we get rid of the basement podcast.
Yes, let's.
In terms of radio, because like I said, it's not sexy. Everyone wants to talk about video and everything else right now. But the numbers of consumption have remained so high and so steady, and I think it's a little bit like the myth of displacement. New doesn't always displace old. So I think the stats that I had seen is, 91 in 2016, 91% of Americans age 12 and up still listen to terrestrial radio in a given week. I mean, that's all types of listening, not just news, obviously. But I am curious about that. Is there something as to why radio continues to be as high as it is?
Yeah, I mean, we do see a lot of people saying they listen in their cars, so it is to a certain extent tied to the kind of commute experience. But a lot of radio stations are now streaming too, and we've seen let's see if I can find that. But there's a growth in the percent of Americans who've listened to online radio. So it's about 50% of Americans have now listened to online radio in the past week. So that's no longer tethered to your car. You sometimes hear people talk about self-driving vehicles and radio together, which is a weird combination, but they're like, what'll happen when they're self-driving cars, and maybe will that fall off the kind of the radio listenership? Well, we do see a lot of online radio listening. So people can do that at their desks, people can do it at work, people can do it at home. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just people like the format. It's a very convenient way of consuming it. It's kind of ambient, but it's there, and people are really still doing it. So it seems to be keeping their audience, and it's the kind of the human connection that it's maybe a little harder to get from online. Is you hear somebody talking to you, you get a relationship. I have a relationship with some of my favorite radio hosts. I feel like I know them. So yeah, it's all kind of different kind of ways of engaging with the news. Yeah.
That's what I think is interesting about audio, and just I think it's, like I said, easy to maybe not think about it as an option as much with so much out there, but it is something that you can do when you're driving, you're running, you're in the subway, you're on a tractor. When it comes to agriculture, it's while people are doing other things, they can still take in information. So yeah. I did find that quite surprising, though. So.
Yeah, and the radio thing obviously dovetails with the podcast thing, where you have a radio show and then it becomes a podcast that people can download and listen to at their leisure. So that's, again, one of those things about media companies trying to reach the audience wherever. Like, well, people don't necessarily have as many kind of transistor radios anymore. Great, we will put them as files online that people can put on their smartphones and listen to, even if they don't have internet connections.